of them. I mean, my questions are usually pretty short. I mean, and a lot of times I'm just like, I have no comment because I kind of get it, and I don't really feel the need to say something to impress anyone because I'm not. I'm not planning on running again. I may, but I'm not coming at it from the point of view like me. I need to get reelected. It's like I'll make that decision when I have to make that decision. So in the meantime, I'm gonna play the game like I'm not because it's so liberating. And since it doesn't pay much, it's even liberating in that respect because it's like you can walk away from it and not feel as if you're doing any financial damage. So initially, I thought it was not good to be paid so little, but it's really very freeing. Anyways, I'm sorry. I keep going on. It's 4 after, so I'm biting the meeting time. Sorry about that. Chairs.
That's okay. I was just making sure that YouTube is up, which it seems to be. And Barry, nice to see you online. You want to just say hi? Just we make sure that your microphone's working.
Hi, Barry. Just say hello. I have nothing to report at this stage.
Okay, that's fine, Barry. We're at the point of starting the meeting officially. Do you have anything you want to say for the public comment period from say now until 5:15? I mean, if we might start with our guests if there's no one online to ask or make public comment. So I guess it's really you if you want.
I have nothing to say at this point. Maybe I'll have a reaction to some business that is transacted later, but nothing right now. Thank you.
No problem. Nice to have you on board. Wig, do you want to run through anything before we go on to Linda and Richard, who are already with us, or?
No, I did. It took me a while, but I did email someone about a future regional land use discussion, which I had said I would do. And we'll see. I emailed MIT. We'll see if they come back with a name. If not, I'll kind of go down the list. Other than that, I have a question stored up for commuter rail, but it can wait.
In spite of all my attempts, and this is not really, well, I'll just show you guys. For some ridiculous reason, I have yet to be able to get the Zoom feed from YouTube to actually go to the prepared stream. I'm going to futz with that off on another monitor. It doesn't affect the archival YouTube recording, but it just means that anybody who was going to participate by putting chat into YouTube is not going to get directed to the right stream unless I can try to fix this. It's something about Zoom and YouTube.
So should we go right to commuter rail?
I'll support that. Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Linda. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Hi, Linda. Yep.
Hi, Linda and Richard. Thank you both for joining us.
You're welcome. How do I get the picture on, Richard? I see you just got it.
If you go into the bottom left-hand corner, there should
I can help
be
with that. I can actually throw you a message to start video. That'll help.
Got it.
Yeah. As the host, I can do things like, please start, please unmute.
Hi, Bonnie. Nice to see you. Hi, Lenny. Hi, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
Oh, and by the way, if you want to be able to share your screen, I will allow that in case you want to share something.
We decided not to. We thought we'd just do like a town
Even
hall
better.
meeting with you. And,
Yeah.
you know, instead of talking at you, we'll talk with you. So.
Fantastic. Well, because I'm sharing my screen just to have the agenda and all of the Brady Bunch boxes saved on YouTube. And that's why, by the way, that's why I'm sharing my screen, even though it's weird to see yourselves on a shared screen. I'm happy to pull up anything in my web browser and put it up if you'd like.
Awesome.
But I'm totally good with, as you said, just to have a conversation and hear what's new.
Well, I really am happy to have the opportunity to meet with you again, but also to introduce you to our VP of Service Delivery for Keolis. So I'd like to introduce you to Richard Deaton.
Thanks, Linda. So you know, you may detect that my accent is not exactly Bostonian, but I've been with Keolis Commuter Services in Boston since April of 18. I have been on the railroad for 35 years, but most of that was in the UK. Basically, I was in a similar role with a couple of different train companies in the UK. I've actually worked for Keolis for 23 years. I just worked that out, which surprised me. But anyway, so basically, what does a VP of Service Delivery do? So I'm responsible for customer service, for operations planning, which is the scheduling of the trains, for performance, and for transportation. And transportation is the locomotive engineers, the conductors, and the assistant conductors. Generally the person to blame, I think. It's very different, the US railroad to the UK railway, but there's also a significant amount of similarities between the two as well. So I just thought I'd touch on a couple of different subjects, really. I guess the first one is COVID-19, and the impact that has had on all of our lives has been huge. In the early part of this, we had, actually, I was looking at the numbers. So up until between March and November of last year, we had 43 employees who had contracted COVID-19. A number of them, about 4 of them at that point in time, had been hospitalized. 2 of them we actually thought we were going to lose, but both of them did pull through. But it was very, very close, I have to say. But then we really saw a huge spike in cases since Thanksgiving. So we went from 43 at the beginning of November to, as of yesterday, 240 employees who've been confirmed with having had COVID-19. You know, and to put it in transportation terms, so just looking at transportation employees, it was 15 up to November, and now it's 100 up to yesterday. The big issue for us, actually, in terms of being able to operate the service, was the dispatch centres. So the dispatch centres at South Station and at Cobble Hill. The one at South Station we share with Amtrak, and at one point in time in November we had 50% of our workforce, both Amtrak and Keolis, out with COVID-19. Wow. So it was just, you know, really, really significant spike, and that forced us into then having to change the train service we were operating in mid-December. Obviously, we've put in, you know, the relevant precautions and the social distancing and the mask wearing, and the, you know, one of the big things for us is what we call fogging of coaches. So every night we fog the coaches with disinfectant. That's the most effective way, but it's unseen by the public, you know. So we've stepped up train cleaning efforts at North and South stations, but to be honest, that's a bit of, it's trying to demonstrate to people that we're doing something, but the real most effective way of dealing with COVID-19 is the fogging that happens, you know, behind the scenes, as it were, overnight. In terms of, you know, one of the friction points, I think, between passengers and our employees is about masks. You know, I think one of the complaints that we receive, the highest number of complaints about at the moment, is that our staff are not intervening when a passenger is on the train without a mask. That's deliberate. We do not want our staff to get into a conflict situation. Frankly, we haven't got the authority to enforce mask wearing. A conductor is not able to enforce the regulation, and we don't want them to get into a conflict situation with a passenger. Up until recently, the transit police were also reticent to get involved in those issues. But I have to say the transit police have really now stepped up when it comes to dealing with that. You know, and of course, you know, there is in the sort of legalese around mask wearing, the sort of you know, ability for a passenger to say, well, I have a medical condition, which means I don't have to wear a mask, and I don't have to prove to you that I've got a medical condition either. So that's another reason why we wanted to keep our staff out of that particular issue. But it is a source of friction between people occasionally. So that's where. So I guess the most exciting news on the COVID front is the vaccinations. We are now able, as of today, to encourage our employees to sign up to be vaccinated. So MBTA have got, they are coordinating vaccinations for all transit employees as part of phase 2 of the vaccination program, which should start in the middle of February. So as of today, we've got the ability for everybody to sign up to volunteer for the vaccination, say, you know, what time is convenient for them to go. And we are strongly encouraging employees to sign up for that. At the moment, ourselves and Amtrak and MBTA more widely are taking an encouragement approach rather than a, you know, you must get vaccinated. I believe yesterday American Airlines were telling their employees it's compulsory. But at the moment, that's the approach that we've taken on that one. So I'm hoping, you know, that, as I say, beginning middle of February, we should start to see some of our frontline employees, conductors, locomotive engineers, going to receive their first dose of the vaccine. Obviously, COVID has had a huge impact on ridership, you know, the numbers of passengers across the system has fallen pretty dramatically. Up to November, before Thanksgiving, we were around about 18% of normal ridership. Post Thanksgiving, that's dropped further. So we're currently around about 10% of normal ridership. And obviously that's having a huge impact on MBTA's financial position. And you'll have seen all the discussions around the so-called Forging Ahead program, which actually is currently, you know, reducing service. As of the weekend just passed, we obviously reduced our weekend train service. Originally, the MBTA said that they wanted to stop weekend train service completely. You know, I think we were able to make a case that actually, you know, 5 of the lines have about 60% of the ridership. So actually to concentrate on those 5 lines. And in some cases, it's actually better than what we operated before. So if you take the Providence line, the weekend schedule that we've got on the Providence line now is better than the schedule that we had prior. Because on a Sunday morning, you couldn't even get into Boston from Providence. Now we actually are running trains on Sunday mornings. So I was glad that at least in, you know, that we've actually made a bit of an improvement. We've also improved the Worcester line service so that it's a regular interval service throughout Sunday, and the same on the Eastern route. The next scheduled change is going to be April the 5th, or thereabouts. It most likely April the 5th. And with the spring schedule change, we're aiming to create a much more predictable, regular interval, all-day service. The thing that's you know, for us, that's changing, and I think this is a change that's going to be, I think, permanent. Actually, people need to have all-day options. And commuter rail traditionally has been about running a larger number of trains in a small amount of time, if you like, into the morning peak and getting them back again in the evening peak around traditional 9 to 5 commuting hours. I think those days have gone. And now I think people will work more flexibly. And, even, there was a survey that actually the MBTA did in December of employers in Boston. And 2/3 of employers are saying post Labor Day, they're expecting their employees to be back in the office, but not 5 days a week. Most likely 3 days a week. And it might be, that you're morning in the office and afternoon you're back at home. And the problem with the previous commuter rail offer was, it is great. You've got options in the morning peak to get you into the city for 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning. But if you finish at midday, you could find you've got a 2 or even 3 hour gap in the service. So, what we're developing at the moment is a regular interval schedule across all of our lines. So that actually people haven't got to think about, well, if I go in on commuter rail, I might get stuck and I won't be able to go home on commuter rail. We've got to make this. In fact, we should stop calling it commuter rail. So I'd love to come up with a different name for it. But so that's what we're working on at the moment. The other thing is that we are, this approach needs less equipment, frankly. So we're sending 8 locomotives away out of the operational fleet. 4 of them have gone already, although actually they're actually going to Erie for overhaul. So we will get those back at a later date. We've taken 20, or we're in the process of taking 20 coaches out of the fleet. And that's going to lead to a reduction in the costs for operating the service from the MBTA. I think in reality, we are going to see a smaller workforce out of this. So I would expect, that we'll lose potentially some assistant conductors, in the spring. We've already reduced the number of ticket validation agents. We've tried to redeploy them. So we've increased the number of train cleaners, for instance. So we've moved some people from that function into the cleaning, which is what we've actually increased the numbers of people. So, it's not the best of times. It's difficult. We're having to work through this with the T, but we've actually got to now start looking forward, thinking about what we can do to attract people back when we've been through the vaccination and actually provide a better service and an all-day service and give people more options than they had before. The other thing I just wanted to briefly mention, because I think it's quite important. So positive train control, which is a safety system, was installed across all of the commuter rail routes by December of last year, which was the federal mandate. But there's another part to this, and that's called ATC. So on the south side of our operation, we use an in-cab signaling system called ATC, which is actually developed by Amtrak for the Northeast Corridor many years ago. But we are installing ATC on the north side routes, and that's a big project. It's got to be completed by December of 2022. We've installed it. It's most of the way on the New Hampshire main line now already. The next part of this is actually fitting it onto the Fitchburg line. And the approach that's being taken for the Fitchburg is actually to close the line completely between Boston and Littleton from the 1st of March to the 3rd of May. So for 2 months, that line's going to be closed down completely to enable a big chunk of this ATC work to progress. We will be running trains between Wachusett and Littleton, and then obviously connecting in with buses on that for the last section into Boston. The rest of the route, because there's actually no weekend service on this, will be done at weekends. It's more complex actually between Littleton and Wachusett because of the interaction with freight and so on. So that's the approach that's being taken on that one.
Richard,
so there's lots. Yes, go on.
Sorry to interrupt. I try to break your flow. Is the equipment moves going to be are they going to be happening Littleton to Boston, or are they going to have to go all the way out and back in on the Worcester line? No,
we can get them via the Stony Brook branch. So they go up the Lowell line and then across to Stony, through Stony Brook, and right. then that okay. way. So actually we've got a couple of engineers who are currently familiarizing themselves with that territory, so we can make moves that way.
Excellent. So that adds, compared to a regular move back to Boston, it adds what, like 40 minutes? But it's not as bad as going Worcester back in, right?
Yes, exactly. Excellent. It's much easier doing it that way than the Worcester way.
That's good news. Great. Thanks for that.
No, that's fine. So as I say, at the moment, we are trying to think through options for service, what we can do to improve it, and actually really want to focus post Labor Day on attracting people back. I think I'm going to say it. I think some people seem to view commuter rail as a bit of a distressed purchase. It's almost like, oh, the congestion on the Mass Pike's so bad, we'll have to use commuter rail. Actually, we want people to use commuter rail as the first choice because it's better, and that's the challenge that we've got. But I'm any questions or anything, I'm happy to take.
I've got one if we can start us off. This is Brian, right? Thanks for joining us today. I think you mentioned, Richard, you used to be in the UK, so I have kind of a question comparing how the contract with Keolis and the MBTA is structured compared to your experience in the UK. So when Keolis wants to do a schedule change or wants to propose scheduling today, do you have authority to do that? Do you have to work with the MBTA? And then how does that work with, or how does that compare to your experience in the UK, where the operators may have had more kind of internal authority to set schedules, or less, or more? Or is there a system that works better in your opinion compared to what contract you guys have right now?
Well, okay, yeah, all right. So in theory, the way that it should work here is that the MBTA should tell us what the schedule is. They should tell us the equipment cycle, and we should just operate it. And we almost shouldn't get involved in it, but actually in reality, we're closer to the customer, frankly. We understand the operation in more detail than they do. So I think, we have actually increased our operations planning team to actually do more of that work. But ultimately, the decision is with the T. We can give them options and they can pick which option they want. It can, the decision-making process is not necessarily reflected in the contract, shall we say. But that's the way we work, and we try to work together on it. And I think we do work together on it. In terms of what happens in the UK, the contracts are much more about, they're less prescriptive, I guess, in terms of, it's almost like, you've got to deliver this amount of capacity between this time and this time. We want the span of the service to be between, say, 5 o'clock in the morning and midnight or whatever it might be, but then it's over to you. It's over to the operator. So it is different. And it's fair to say that in it depends where you are in the UK, because some contracts are specified by Transport for London, which obviously manages the inner suburban network around London. Others are by the Department for Transport, and the Transport for London is much more intrusive and much more prescriptive. The Department for Transport is much less prescriptive. So there's different models, even in the UK, there's different models.
So Len has his hand up. Len, if you want to.
Thank you, Wig. So about the people wearing masks on trains, I understand the issue about enforcement once they're on the train, but do you have the ability to say that you can't get on the train unless you're wearing a mask?
No.
Okay.
No, we don't have the authority to stop somebody. No.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
I just in follow up to that, I wonder if at North Station and South Station, the T could actually watch people boarding for you, at the main gates and help with the mask issue. Just a thought.
The transit police now have the authority to stop somebody boarding, so so the MBTA police, so they could, and they do help. To be fair, they do help. And to be honest, we don't want to make a big deal of it. So we do keep some masks available at the information desks, for instance. So if the transit police have got stopped somebody, we've got the ability to give them a mask and then let them get on their journey,
And we do make the announcements at North Station. We make the announcements on board the trains. To be honest and fair to T Police, I mean, we talk constantly about this. And with the area they have to cover, including bus and subway and everything else, they're just not staffed to be able to be the enforcement for this as well. So when they're there, they do.
I think especially inbound, it would be difficult, but outbound from the main stations, I could see that they might be able to help you.
Okay.
And
Wig,
I'm wondering, just out of tradition, Bonnie, do you have any questions?
Absolutely, I do. I've got a whole bunch of things I've written down. So, I listened to the mask thing, and a couple of things I brought up on my other laptop here. This is a mandate from Charlie Baker in the city of Boston, in Mayor Menino, that people are supposed to be wearing masks. That's number one. Also, the new president has mandated that he wants people wearing masks for the next 100 days. And so this isn't new to anybody. Now, the people, I listened to the ridership, what Richard was saying, that we're down to like 10 to 15% of people taking the commuter rail. This is just my opinion, my experience, because I go in a couple times a month. The people that are on the commuter rail now are professional people, and they're educated people, and they're going to work. There's nobody that's going right now on the commuter rail that I would think of that's going to a sporting event or the theater, because those things aren't open. So I'm wondering, do you have any data on how many people are not wearing masks? Because when I'm on the train, everybody's wearing a mask. They're wearing them properly. These are professional people. They have suits on, they have jackets on, they have briefcases. These are not people. It's not like, think about it, in 6 months from now, people coming back at midnight from a Red Sox game or a Celtics game that have been drinking all day. You're not going to get them to wear masks. This is not that type of people. So I'm having a hard time wondering what the prevalence is of how many people that aren't wearing masks. And also, the ridership is so low that if there's somebody there that's not wearing a mask, you can get 6 feet away from them.
Yes.
Because there's plenty of rooms on those trains right now.
It's a small number, but it is a source of complaint that we've had. It's reduced significantly in terms of passengers complaining about us not enforcing the policy. I would say, now we're probably, Linda will correct me if I'm wrong, but we'll probably get 2 or 3 a week, maybe.
Around that. And what you'll end up doing is, if it's one person on a train, I'll get 5 complaints for that train. And like I said, we've had instances where we've got somebody that's on a regular basis, let's say 3 times in 1 week, is doing it and refusing to wear a mask. We reach out to T Police and they meet that train and they take care of that. So we have been doing that.
Yeah.
So, hey, and I don't know if we can switch gears, but I will switch gears. What's going to happen with Stephanie Pollock going to Washington? What is that going to impact the commuter rail at all, or what's that going to do to the T overall?
I think it will have an impact.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a probably a slightly controversial example, but I think if you watched FMCB 2 meetings ago, Stephanie Pollock was very exercised about late night service on commuter rail and how expensive it was to operate it, and that we should be finishing at 9 o'clock of an evening. And she did get some pressure from other members of the board about that position, and to be honest, we've done quite a bit of work behind the scenes to look at the true costs of it and find ways of trying to reduce the costs of it. Because, I think there are people who are in shift jobs at hospitals and so on who rely on commuter rail, and, they finish at 10 o'clock at night or around that point, and they need trains at sort of 10, 11 o'clock. So, I think that, from our point of view, I think she was very strong on that, and I think that might change, but until we get a permanent appointee for her job, I don't think we'll know how it's gonna shape up,
Can I just pop in as someone who's dealt with some people who I've tried dealing with it myself, and dealt with some people. I was really enthusiastic when Stephanie got the job, and it will depend on who replaces her. I'll just say I hope that whoever replaces her is a lot more responsive, to people than she has been, because it wasn't simply me. I've heard from a lot of people that rank higher than I do in the transportation world, that it was just really hard to get a response from her, and it seemed like a lot of things were funneled to her, so that you needed to get a response from her. It's like, it's a big job, and so I think it's important to really delegate a lot, because you can't respond to everyone if you're doing everything, and so I think it's important to delegate effectively, so that people can get the responses when they have questions and issues that they need information in order to do the next thing that they need to do. So that's my take on it. Thank you.
I just picking up on that point, I think, in terms of it being a big job, it's a huge job. And what surprised me when I first came to the US was how many decisions ended up on her desk. Because it was just incredible, the amount of stuff to deal with.
They ended up on her desk and they didn't go anywhere for a long time, so just like stuck, and it was so frustrating,
So I have a couple questions, if no one else does. The first one, I got to set up a little bit. I use a commuter rail occasionally, but not as a commuter. And I'm usually going to see a site out of town and then coming back. And I don't carry a cell phone anymore or a watch. Mm-hmm. So that's fine when I'm leaving, because there's really good information boards at North Station, which is usually where I'm going from. But when I'm coming back and I'm on a platform and there's no clock and the boards are not flashing how many minutes to the next train in each direction, it's pretty frustrating. I have no idea if I'm going to be waiting for 10 minutes or an hour. And I just think, as a general rule, it would be a good idea to use those boards, which are great. The ticker tape is great. They're very clear, to show the next train in each direction and the time. once every 2 minutes at a minimum.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. And so one of the things that that our IT people are working on actually is to put in a process where we can monitor that the boards are actually showing the information. Because, when I've been out and about at stations, you see ones that are not working, and you say to them, well, why isn't that sign working? And it's like, oh, we didn't know it wasn't working. But now they're actually upgrading the modems that they communicate with, so that we can get information back centrally to say that the information is actually being displayed. We have put in new displays at a number of stations recently, which give you much more visibility of future departures. I'd love to see more of that done.
Yeah, and just to follow up a little bit on that, the stations I'm most apt to use are Lynn or Swampscott. And Lynn has a really diverse population, and some people really know what's going on, and some people really don't know what's going on. So I think on the Lynn platform, it's important. I did use the Swampscott station coming back to town a week ago, and I had about a 40-minute wait, and the whole time it just the ticker tape was working fine, but it was just talking about one emergency condition further out. There was no other information, no train information, no time information, just what was happening further out toward the end of the line, over and over again. And I just think that's not really great management of the time. I think it's terrific that you use these for unusual announcements or updated conditions or temporary announcements. But as with the buses, I think to not use the signs, which are operational and really readable for basic information, and especially on non-commuter times, you have a lot of people who don't ride every day. And there was a young woman across from me who was there for about 30 minutes, and then she just got up and left. So I just think, that's so simple, and that you might be able to do it. I have another question, but I think I'll wait and see what other folks want to ask you.
Okay. Mind if I go in? I mean, because
of course,
I raised my hand, sort of. I mean, as co-chair, I almost don't need to. But
yeah, sure.
But Wig, your point actually touches on something that I was going to ask anyway. So I think it's a good follow-up. So I think it's more at Linda with the vastly reduced ridership. I'm really curious if the call center folks have noticed well, I mean, of course, there's been a decrease in the number of people calling in about problems because the ridership is down. But I'm wondering, is there any sort of decrease in the quality of service that the call center can offer because they're not getting so many calls from people saying, or sort of maybe hinting that there's a problem? And, in other words, if you get 10 people calling about the Lowell line, oh, hey, there's a problem in the Lowell line. So you can infer from the volume of calls coming from different lines about different trains. So with the lack of the ridership, have you guys noticed a tangible effect on the information that you would otherwise get from those people calling?
Actually, we have seen some decrease in calls, but what's interesting is I've also noticed that it's a little bit of an increase in average call time, and that might be that people have more time and my guys aren't, trying to get the next call. Our average call wait time is still 7 seconds or less. which is really excellent. What we're finding, most of these calls now are, believe it or not, some people that haven't written before, but with the schedule change, we're getting a lot of questions about that. We're getting a lot of people calling to say, you know, is it okay, or is it safe to do this, or, you know, how should I approach riding during COVID? We're getting some of those calls as well. We have and still continue to get a large number of calls regarding M-Ticket, especially right after Christmas, because a lot of people get new iPhones and now they've got all their tickets in their wallet on their other phone, and we have to migrate them over for them. So we give a lot of instruction and assistance with that as well. It's interesting, most of our students have gone, that we're coming back and forth into Boston. But they're still calling in regards to what services is running, because I haven't been riding regularly. So our numbers aren't hugely down, but I think what we're seeing is more people calling to talk with us, and so we're seeing a little bit longer time on the phone with them.
Bonnie Wheeler stops taking the train and the calls dramatically decrease. I wonder, what's the correlation? Where's Stefan, the statistician? Stefan, you want to run those numbers?
I was so excited to see you. You're coming in this week, and we addressed the issue you had. I assure you.
Yeah, you probably ran a special train for Bonnie, didn't you?
And everybody had a mask on, and they took my ticket. Yeah.
You know, it's nice, because I know what's ever going on Bonnie's train is got to be good, because we're going to hear about it.
Yeah.
If only we could get everybody to do that.
Well, Craig, I noticed you on mute, but just one quick follow-up. I mean, related to what I was saying about the you know, the lack of people calling and whether that is less information for you guys. With the reduced number of trips, obviously there's less road crew, there's less Keolis employees in the trains because there's fewer trains. I'm just curious, because I really don't know the answer. Is there any lesser amount of information about, like, the stations? Like, I mean, it's in wintertime. I mean, if a train is only running down a line once every 2 hours instead of once every 20 minutes, there's a lot more opportunity for station platforms to get snow covered or icy, or to something happen along the route that would get noticed less often. Is there any I don't know, anecdotal evidence that that's happening?
No, I mean, certainly when it comes to, you know, we've got some snowfall now. You know, we've got plenty of engineering people out there who are out, you know, de-icing platforms and that sort of thing. You know, one of the things we did, because we didn't have the weekend service on a number of lines, is we moved some track patrols to very early Monday morning, so that if there were any issues over the weekend, particularly it got quite windy over the weekend, we thought we might have some trees down. So we arranged, you know, the track patrols to take place from about 2 o'clock Monday morning, you know, that sort of thing. But, you know, I think, you know, one thing I would say in terms of information, and it affects both the on-train information and the signs at the stations, is what we call the PTIS system. So this is the modem on the train that basically is GPS based, you know, which tells you the location of the train, and that links into the information. There's quite a few of those at the moment that are defective. They're all being replaced. There's a new PTIS system being installed. But, you know, if you've got an old control car that's got the old modem, it's what we call ghosting. Yeah, so we know, I mean, it doesn't affect the signaling system, but it affects the information systems. So we're working through installing the new modems on the trains, because they were all 3G modems, and Verizon stopped supporting them. So we're putting in the 4G modems at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you. Craig, I saw you on mute before when I cut you off a little bit. Go ahead.
Yeah, I hate to be the party pooper and bring it back to COVID. Again, I think we touched on the ridership piece and the riders not wearing masks. I did want to go back to those kind of depressing numbers around the number of staff that have contracted. As a human being, I don't want anybody to get sick, so that's bothersome. As somebody, a member of this committee, and putting on my rider hat, my purely rider point of view, a lot of staff out means my train may not show up, and doctors may not be able to get into hospitals, and nurses may not be able to get into hospitals. So concerns on both sides there. Do you have a sense of if the increase in numbers just ties to increases across the state? Is it proportionally the same as other upticks between Thanksgiving and Christmas and family activities and other things around those times?
Yeah.
Or is something running through the commuter rail ranks specifically?
No, I mean, most of the places where we've seen a spike in cases, so I'll give you an example. We had a number of cases post Thanksgiving at Reedville, and you know, the contact tracing suggests that it came through one person who got it from a visit to a place in Rhode Island. He lives in Rhode Island, actually. So, it's always the contact tracing is very difficult, obviously. But, I think,
So I guess I'll follow up to that. So that makes sense. That somebody in there
have followed the general numbers in the state, as it were. You know what I mean?
So that makes sense to me, that the somebody got in their personal life and ended up bringing it to the job accidentally. So I guess the question would be, are you comfortable that, there's a lot of these outlying spots, right? Whether it's Reedville or pick another small little enclave that, with its own small set of managers and small set of employees, and I guess a decentralized model, right? It's not that everybody at commuter rail doesn't show up to work one day in the morning and then disperse. They go off their little fiefdoms, if you will. Do you think it's being treated differently in different spots, and not to pick on Reedville, or it could have been anywhere where the guys and gals at that particular spot are just going to oh, it's just us, we can take the mask down. If management walks through, we'll put them back up, but we're going to be, we're tough. We work in the railroad. We don't need to wear our masks. I'm thinking of the firefighters have a phrase. It's called being a salty Jake. If you're a salty Jake, you pull your mask off early to show everybody the soot in your face, and that you did a good job fighting the fire, but you're actually inhaling some of the fumes as you're on your way out the door. So do you have a salty Jake problem in specific pockets of the commuter rail?
I think, in truth, there have been examples whereby people have been. It's almost like you work on the train. You've got that heightened awareness of it. You're wearing a mask and all of that, and then you come into the crew facility afterwards, and it's and you sit down and you have something to eat and you take your mask off, and then somebody else walks in, and you have a conversation, and people lose the awareness of the outside world and the situation that we're facing. So one of the things we did recently, practical things, we've given people more space. So the crews at Reedville, we hired some rooms in a hotel nearby, so that actually we could spread people out into a hotel rather than just everybody in the small crew room. The other thing we did, and I think it's been on LinkedIn actually. I referred to a couple of employees earlier on who had been incredibly ill throughout this process. They actually agreed to share their experience with everybody. And it's a really, really powerful piece of film, because it's the employee and it's their wife, explaining what they went through. you know, and these guys, you know, I mean, basically, you know, they went to hospital with a bad chest, couldn't breathe, ended up on ventilators, got out of hospital weeks later, and they couldn't walk. They couldn't talk, you know, and you know, unfortunately, a lot of people, COVID is a minor thing, but for these guys, it was terrible. And so we've made this film and we've been showing it to our employees, you know, and trying to get the message across. And we've got some people who've been really, really willing to share their own, you know, experience. And I think the more we've done of that, the more we've got the message across that you've got to really take this seriously.
I think the other thing that we've done a good job of is making it part of PPE, is the personal protection. And a lot of employees have stood up and come forward and say, you know, somebody comes in, they don't have a mask. Hey, you need to put a mask on. So I think people have not been shy about that after all that everybody's experiencing, and we don't want anybody to bring it home to their families or whatever. So I think we've been pretty aggressive with it. I mean, it's a matter of, you know, you have to, it's not a choice. And so we're not getting complaints about crews not wearing masks on trains like we did, you know, months ago. Now that's just not happening. And it's a matter of caring.
Thank you so much for the honesty and the kind of just transparency. I hadn't thought of the angle you thought that you mentioned of the kind of you're out there with the public all day, you're doing your job. So to come in off the train, it's taking off that gear and relaxing for a minute. But it's not an intentional flaunting of the rules. It's just a very human reaction to be you can't be heightened at 100% all the time. You need that downtime. And so I could see how something like that would happen.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Jacob. Hand raised. Go ahead.
I have a question for Mr. Dean. So you mentioned that one of the consequences of the pandemic may be a shrinking in the size of the T's workforce. So say, for instance, how quickly would you're a keyless person, so I imagine that you're not taking care of maintenance or back shop, which is apparently the real sort of sticker. But if, say, the T asked you to run, if, I don't know, in 2 years, a new person was in the governor's mansion and said, I want you to run 30-minute clock face service in all branches all day. And say, just imagine you had the equipment to do it. How quickly would it take you to hire on enough people to provide more service?
Great question.
Yeah. So with respect to a craft like a locomotive engineer, essentially, roughly speaking, from recruitment to actually getting them passed out and operating trains is a year. Okay. And you know, we would normally have a class of no more than 10 people at a time, because one instructor to 10 people is the general rule, because, you know, a lot of the time is spent on a driver simulator. So, you know, you can't have a big class of people because they'll just be sitting around waiting for their colleagues to use the simulator and that sort of thing. So one of the points that we've made to the T, and to be fair, the T accept this, you know, for some crafts, we need to hold on to our people. Yeah. And locomotive engineers and conductors is a long, long training lead time. We need to hold the people as best we can. And so, you know, one of the things we're trying to do in developing the spring schedule is actually to create, sounds a bit strange, create more 8-hour jobs and reduce the amount of overtime to actually keep more people employed, but provide some cost savings to the MBTA. Because what we don't want to do remove the capability of bouncing back. Because, you know, if you know, we get to Labor Day, I would love to be able to get to Labor Day and for us to have a problem, frankly, of too many people wanting to travel at the same time. And then we'd need to change the service and actually go back to the model we had before, which was most locomotive engineers work an average of a 10-hour day. So that it's effectively, they've got 2 hours of overtime a day. Yeah. It's efficient, actually. But, you know, what we're trying to do is to keep as many people as we possibly can. And, you know, we don't want to be losing people because of the point you make, which is the future capability of the system. We know that South Coast Rail is you know, going to start in, you know, late 2023. You know, we're going to have to start recruiting for that. You know, next year, you know, or end of this year, maybe. So, you know, we do have to take that long-term planning for these jobs that need this time period, you know.
All right. From your comment, it seems that how many qualified engineer instructors does the T employ right now? Or does Keolis employ right now?
So in terms of trainers for locomotive engineers, we employ, I'm going to say 3.5, because actually we've got somebody who basically is part of the, you know, locomotive engineers, and he spends some time doing training, and then we've got basically 3 people who are full time, but they are also delivering ongoing training, because an engineer has to be recertified every 3 years. So they have to run research classes. They have to have a rules class every 18 months. So, you know, there's always a constant need to have these people just to maintain the certification of the current employees, as well as training new ones.
And another point that Richard in that is that's been one of the challenges we've had, and we've had to rent space to do the training so that we can social distance people in the training classes. So that's been challenging, getting all of this training in and continuing like it normally does.
So the other sort of capacity bottleneck you mentioned is the simulator.
Yep.
How many more? If say you wanted to double the number of recruits, go from 10 engineer candidates to 10 qualified engineers a year to 20 qualified engineers a year, what new employees would you need? How many new instructors would you need? Another simulator, another 2 simulators? How many more like square feet of facility space, dollar expenditures? Sort of, if you were told that you needed to massively expand sort of training capacity, what resources would you need to do that?
Yeah, I mean, 20 we could do in a year. Yeah, by you know, basically shift working, you know, of people, because you could train people in, you know, early part of the day and train people in the later part of the day, and really utilize this. We got 2 simulators, effectively a locomotive and a control car. You know, I think if you wanted to go above the 20, then I think you'd probably want to look to invest in another simulator, and that's you know, I can't remember what we paid for the last one. You know, it's probably, I'm going to say it's probably you know, around about $800,000, $1 million, something like that for a simulator. Certainly would have paid the last time I procured simulators was in the UK, actually, and that was 1.3 million pounds. So that's about $1.6 million.
Len, you were saying?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry you interrupted me. I thought I caught a pause there, you know. So but I was just wondering what was Jacob driving at with his line of questioning.
There's a lot of sort of movement. I'm just sort of trying to understand if there happened to be political demands for new service, sort of just more what the reality on the ground is. It's really interesting, and also just sort of how quickly the sort of beer system can respond to being asked to do things.
One thing I'd say, Jacob, is that if there were to be investment in new trains, so let's say you know, somebody had an idea of introducing electric multiple units on the Northeast Corridor as an example, then, you know, my experience of new train procurement in the UK has been you get the manufacturer of the train to also procure a simulator. And that's for two reasons. One is that you can validate the design of the train on the simulator before you actually build the train. And that's really interesting because, you know, especially with modern trains with lots of software on them. And then the other thing is, you know, you can pre-train engineers before the new train actually arrives, so that actually when they arrive, you've got people to start testing straight away, and it reduces the amount of time it takes you to introduce the new train. So that's what you know, my experience has been in other places.
Richard, I think I have a bit of a follow-up question, which I think you just kind of touched on a little bit, but obviously the T is headed towards electrification. That's something that the FMCB has come out and supported, and I think there was some potential funding in the transportation bond bill for that. What would Keolis's role in that development be, and then what do you see as like the operational benefits that you'd be able to deliver under electrified model?
Yeah, so I mean, we'll do what the T wants us to do, and we've made some of our own proposals to them about, you know, what you could do, particularly on the Northeast Corridor, you know, and the types of trains that might be available to operate on that line. You know, I think in terms of benefits, there's obviously an electric multiple unit is faster. They accelerate more quickly. I think there would be a significant change in journey times on the Providence line. I think it would make the operation of the Providence line in particular better in terms of interaction with Amtrak, because it's sometimes quite difficult to plan, you know, quite sluggish diesel trains around Acela trains because of the differential in the performance of them. So it would actually increase the capacity of the Northeast Corridor. They're more reliable. You know, an EMU is you know, at least twice as reliable as a good diesel. You know, and there's the obvious environmental benefits. Although, of course, you know, with electric trains, the environmental benefit is only as good as the way you generate the power for the electric wires. But, you know, nevertheless, they are far more efficient. You know, and I think the other thing that we shouldn't lose sight of as well is, you know, along with electrification, we should be looking at high-level platforms where possible, because I think, you know, that makes a significant difference in terms of the station dwell time, the amount of time you have to spend, you know, and the ease of which passengers are getting on and off trains. You know, we've got an aging population. You know, people need to be able to get on and off trains easily. Sorry, I can go on for hours about this. I'll shut up.
Thank you.
Before Jacob, before you go, I just want to give us a quick time check. I've got 8 after 6. We could talk to Richard and Linda longer than 6:15, but I'm guessing you guys probably have a hard stop at the scheduled time. If you don't, you're welcome to stay on beyond 6:15, but we'll certainly let you go at the prearranged time if necessary. So again, just bear in mind, we've got maybe about 8, make that 6 or 7 minutes left. Jacob, go ahead.
I have, can I ask one more quick question to Linda and Richard?
Please.
Yeah, if both of you had the ability to get one piece of infrastructure out of the T, that I guess for Richard, I'm going to have to tell you that I'm going to have to add, I mean, I know that you probably choose either electrification or high level platform, so neither of those two things. If you had to get one piece of like concrete steel infrastructure out of the T that would make your jobs and your lives significantly easier, what would it be?
Oh, crikey. That's a difficult one. There's a number I can think of, really. I'm not sure which one of those I would prioritize above the others. You know, there are some particularly difficult sections of single track that I'd like to see made into double track. And, you know, perhaps, you know, there's a list of those I could think of. I think there are some quite good value for money ones that could be invested in. You know, that would actually mean that we could run a more regular interval service on certain lines. So that Haverhill line's quite difficult, actually. You know, and fixing some of the missing sections of double track might mean that we could run you know, even a 60-minute interval service. You know, we've been struggling to work out how even to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the passengers' biggest complaints seem to be, you know, obviously delays. They want to get to where they need to be on time. And we've done some really wonderful things as far as communications and getting them information to help them plan. Some of the things, I mean, some of our stations could really use an overhaul with high-level platforms and stuff like that to make that experience a little bit better, or when you're at a station, especially out in weather and stuff like that. So I'd love to see getting some upgrades to some of these stations. And I think, like Richard said, it's so frustrating when you're in a single track area and you have a disruption. You're dead in the water. There's nothing you can do. And trying to explain that to people is difficult.
Yeah, and I think with respect to some of the stations, you know, there's now modular concepts of platforms. You know, the you know, different materials. You know, they've even used polystyrene as a material for platforms. You know, concrete in New England doesn't last very long. And we gotta get away from that. We actually recently put in a heated platform.
I was going to ask you to do that. Yeah.
Where was that, Linda?
Shirley Station.
Yeah, it's really, you know, it's great. It's great when it snows and stuff like that. You know,
it's dry. It's snowing out, and the platform's dry, and it's just amazing. Yeah. We were shocked.
Yeah. So
I want that on my front driveway.
Yes.
Oh, I just realized, of all the regular committee members, Karen, you haven't said anything. Do you want to get a word in? Yeah, let me hit the unmute button for you, Karen, in case it helps. So just want to make sure that all of our regular committee members get a chance at least to weigh in.
Yeah, I also wondered about Barry. If he has a question, Stefan, if you think there's time.
I just hit the ask to unmute for Barry as well.
While we're waiting for Barry. Remind me, when does the Keolis contract? When does that come up? I know they extended it. How? Like, how long is it for right now?
It runs until, technically, it runs until June of 2026. The MBTA have an option to actually terminate it a year before that if they are ready to do the procurement of the next contract.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I can't remember, there's a date by which they obviously have to make that decision. I honestly can't remember off the top of my head when that is.
Richard, might be good. Can you tell them what we ended last year, 2020, with on-time performance? And because that was great, and where we are now.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, despite the challenges of COVID and so on, we ended last year at 93.4% on performance, which was obviously our best year. I think, to be fair, the best year in the history of the network. So going back to MBCR, Amtrak, and so on, as far as we can ascertain, you know, and that's, you know, wasn't a small feat. You know, there was a lot of effort went in by a lot of people to put in that good performance. You know, I think you know, in January, I didn't look this morning where we were, but we're above 94. I think we're heading 95% this period.
So I had one last question, if it's okay.
Wait, before you go, let me just make one more call out to Barry or Karen.
Hello, a question.
Yep, we can hear you.
Before you're talking about positive train control, what is the relationship between positive train control and the signal system?
Right. So what positive train control does is it's basically beacons in the track that communicate with the train, and they tell the train how far it's got to run before it comes to a stop signal. And if the locomotive engineer is not braking the train in order to stop at that signal, it's going to intervene and it's going to stop the train. It's a bit binary in the sense that it decides the engineer is now going over the braking curve, and it'll just make an emergency brake application and you'll come up in a heap pretty quickly. Yeah. So it's not very finessed, but it's very safe. Now, so that's what positive train control does. It stops trains passing signals at danger, and obviously coming into conflict with other trains. ATC is the automatic train control, is a little bit more finessed in the sense that it gives you more continuous enforcement. An ATC picks up speed restrictions for curves and things like that. So it's a much more comprehensive system. So that's how that works.
So you need both. You need both.
Correct. ATC is the very comprehensive, continuous train control system. You know, it's not operating the train for you. You know, that's still left with the skill of the locomotive engineer. It's basically supervising what the engineer does and making sure that they're driving within the parameters of the lines, you know, the line speed and the signaling.
Okay. Wait, I cut you off. Sorry. Go right ahead.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I have a question about reverse commute. So when I was headed up to Swampscott a week ago, it was to a potential construction site, and those guys, you know, start pretty early. Not as early as some T people probably, but still pretty early. And there were two schedules, an alternate and a regular schedule. And the alternate schedule got there mid-morning. So it just would be impossible. But even the early regular schedule got there a little bit after 8, which was problematic. So I just want to say that for reverse commute, especially if it's not every day, I mean, I would go way early if I had to. And I wouldn't mind hanging around in a early coffee shop or something like that. But I think you ought to think about that one trip. And sorry, I got to take a call. You can mute me, Stefan.
Yeah, I think that's the sentiment that I've heard echoed elsewhere as well, that the reverse commute first trip, people wish it was earlier, but with the constraints of available equipment and crews, and you can't just send them out on a reverse trip and then have them just sitting out at the end of the line doing nothing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the model, if you like, is to have facilities at the ends of the line generally, and then start so all the first trains come out of the facilities at the far ends of the line. Bit different on the Lowell line because Lowell hasn't got a facility, so all the trains come out of Boston, and it's one of the things we are looking at is whether actually some of those deadhead equipment moves could actually be a useful passenger train, but it's I think there may be things we can do, on the eastern route. At the moment, obviously, Rockport is closed, so anything that's going up the Gloucester branch is coming out of BET. Again, something we need to look at, keeping some of those early morning trains and actually using them as passenger trains.
Wait, did that cover everything? And well, also let me make one last call because we're coming up on 20 after 6. Sorry for holding you 5 minutes after, but any last call for any last quick questions or comments before we let Richard and Linda go back to their families?
Yeah, and Bradley too, if you have a question.
I feel greatly enlightened by everything that's been said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Barry, I have a fast question. Is there any possibility that the F-40 Screamers would be rebuilt and put back in service?
Oh, we could give you a report on that during the standing committee updates. Yeah, because the F-40s are actively in progress of being rebuilt.
I'm talking about the older ones.
Ah.
The Screamers.
I don't have the answer for that. Richard, do you have a quick answer? I don't remember about that earlier fleet.
No, I mean, I think at the moment, with where we are with the demand for locomotives over the next 2-3 years, I think we've got the F-40s being rebuilt in Erie, the 3C program. We're actually we're giving them more locomotives to actually accelerate the speed at which that overhaul program operates. We may overhaul a couple more GP40s, but quite a number of those are probably not going to be needed in the short term. But the HSP 46 is going to be coming up for its top deck overhaul in the next couple of years. So who knows, because, it's, I personally, what I would like to see is let's invest in some EMUs for the Providence line, and that way release the HSPs for their overhaul rather than, get yet more second-hand stuff or third-hand stuff or whatever it is. But that's my personal opinion.
Oh yeah, understood. No worries. I think we're probably at a point to close your segment. Richard and Linda, both of you, thank you so much for joining us. It's a real treat to see you again, Linda. I hope your son Tom's doing okay.
He's great.
Okay, great. Her son Tom is an engineer. Again, Richard, thank you. Great to meet you. And please do use us as a resource. If anything comes up, Linda knows that we want to be available not only to do oversight as our charter dictates, but also to interface, facilitate research, but don't be a stranger, I guess I'm saying.
No, that's great. No, I really appreciate it, and thanks for putting up with me.
Thanks for coming through, Linda. You're always great. And Mr. Dean, you have the original Boston accent, just so you know.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Boy.
Yep. Thank you both.
Good night, and thanks again.
Thanks.
All right. On the agenda is capital going next. Does that work for Brian and Len?
Sure. We can talk about our most recent meeting. Len, did you want to talk? I saw you came off mute, or do you want me to give an update?
Oh, Brian, if you could do it, I'd appreciate it. And I'll fill in.
Great.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
So I don't remember everything that we talked about, but I'll try to give the highlights.
It was a short meeting.
It was a short meeting. So we talked a little bit about the bills from the previous legislative session. I don't think I've talked about them in this forum yet, but I think I did send an email out. There were a couple of things that were passed that did impact the MBTA, and then a couple of things that were essentially vetoed by the governor due to, they were passed with veto-proof majorities, but due to the timing of the passage of the bills at the end of the previous legislature, they could not be sent back, so they will have to be refiled if so desired by the state, the legislatures. So a couple things that were passed and then vetoed. So there was a fee on transportation network companies that was vetoed, but a portion of that fee was going to be dedicated to the MBTA, and a portion of that fee was going to go towards means tested fares. So unfortunately, that is not going to be implemented. I think there were some current concerns from the governor about the language in the bill. I think from what I hope is, or I guess what I'm hearing or what I hope is that those concerns can be reconciled and there can be a bill that has a little bit better language or whatnot. But it does seem like the legislature is supportive of means tested fares. I think I've spoke in this forum before about my support, and I think the CIF generally is in agreement with that. That's something we'd like to see move forward, but not in the current session or current bill. Other parts of the transportation bond bill that did pass were some authorizations to borrow for electrification. I think it was up to $200 million for the Fairmount and Beverly lines, which I think is the one that goes through Lynn. So I think from our perspective, that made sense as the ones to start with. Obviously, it's not an authorization to spend. I think that still needs to come, but at least moving in the right direction, kind of moving in step with the FMCB. The other bill that was passed was the housing choice side, and this is also something that I support, which is, I thought the language was a little bit light, so I think they could have strengthened it a little bit, but this was a provision that required municipalities, so municipalities within the MBTA service area, ones that have stations, so really commuter rail stations, or I guess rapid transit as well, to come up with a plan to improve the zoning around those stations to allow for multifamily housing within a half mile. So the language in the bill doesn't require the whole area. Like I would have liked to see, the entire, half mile circle around a station be, permitted for multifamily zoning by right. But this is at least a step in the right direction. So, I think I've long thought that if these assets, these commuter rail stations could be better utilized, that would help the T. If they could be used more in a balanced manner, that would also help the T. So if we could have, I think, reverse commute kind of situation where you've got people going against the peak travel, especially in the morning, will help bring balance to the commuter rail service, and that would really improve overall service that can be provided. Obviously, that also needs to come with businesses, and if people are commuting to jobs, they need commercial space by those stations as well. But it does seem, from my perspective, that there's a lot of outlying commuter rail stations that are not densely populated or densely surrounded. So I think this is, again, step in the right direction. Is tied to some sort of funding from the state. So if municipalities don't comply, funding gets withheld. So it's a little bit of the stick of the carrot and the stick approach, but hopefully more to come. So I'll try to keep an update. I'll try to keep an eye out and see what is refiled from the legislature on the TNC fee, because I think that could be a good revenue source, and also what does come up on the means tested fares, because I think it's time to get something going. And I've long supported a dedicated revenue source from the state to fund that, and it seemed like they'd kind of figured it out. Putting the two together, it seemed like the dollars actually seemed to come pretty close from what I saw. So,
Brian, can you remind me what was the issue that the governor had with the language?
So on the means tested fares, I thought he was concerned that the language wasn't specific enough in terms of how to implement it, how to. I think the language is essentially like the T shall implement means tested fares, and I don't know specifically what he was concerned with, but that's my impression from what I saw.
Okay, gotcha. And I'll just mention something I forgot to mention in the meeting itself regarding the TNCs. In the future transportation report, it was interesting to see that there were a lot of minorities and people from the inner core and inner cities, the inner part of the inner core were using TNCs. A lot, which was a little surprising because you figure, with the higher costs, that it would be prohibitive for them to do so, but clearly they are, and I'm not quite sure what to make of that in terms of whether putting additional fees is a good thing or a bad thing. It'd be good, of course, if it went to the T and then they started using the T more, because I think it would be a little less or a lot less expensive. But if for whatever reason they're not using the T, you then add that cost to it, then it becomes another economic burden for them. And so I'm just trying to wear a couple of hats. In the end, I think putting more into public transit is a good thing. And it's certainly my thought pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, it really depends on a lot of things, meaning how safe it is to be in an enclosed space with people who, for the most part, will wear masks, but will not. And I think at this point, I think the people who don't, it's not really ignorance. It's really defiance. And I really think we need to come to terms with how we're going to handle that defiance, because at some point, we don't allow people to do things that harm other people. And for some reason, this COVID thing hasn't crossed that threshold. It's not really clear to me why that's the case. Anyways, so if Brian has more to say, I'll stop talking. If not, I'll give one more little update that I got.
I know we also talked a little about the FMCB updates. I think the update from the last month was that the CARES Act, they're expecting to get about $300 million, but we're still planning to go ahead with the service cuts that have kind of been discussed, but at least a little bit firmer on the expected funding that's coming in. And I think that's the only one that I wrote down. And I don't know if there's anything else that you remember from our meeting that you want to bring up. I don't have the best notes this time through.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, did you mention that we're getting 300 million or a little bit less than 300 million?
That's, yeah, I thought we were getting 300.
Yeah, a little bit less. And yeah, as Brian said, I mean, it's really going to not affect the plan to reduce service, because that's really based on the demand for the service. I mean, and so I mean, the philosophy is that you don't want to run, I mean, a lot of empty buses and trains, you know, but that does create a bit of a potential for a death spiral in terms of usage, because I mean, if the service isn't there and people don't think it's going to be there, then they don't think about using it, or they don't see that as a viable option. So we just have to be wary of that. The only other thing I'll add is that I did talk with my state rep, who's a part of the MBTA caucus, and he is pretty sure me that there was nothing about FMCB, the governance for the governance for the MBTA, you know, in the transportation bond bill, and so that's still outstanding, and so yeah, I think I'm pretty sure they extended the life of the FMCB a year, and so they're going to have to come up with something, I would say, in the next 3 to 4 months, I mean, to give those folks some indication of what to do. That would be the reasonable expectation, but chances are, it'll go right down to the wire. And so I guess the short is that we can probably still chime in on it if we want. I'll try and find out more about where things are with that. So that's it. Thank you.
Anyone questions for Len or Brian or anyone else on the Capital and Finance Subcommittee?
Well, I would just chip in. I mean, Brian knows this, but I think density around the stations is a great idea. Whether it's more jobs or more mixed income housing, I think depending on the context, it could be either, but.
Which do you think would be better?
Well, I do think it depends on the context. I think in communities that have a ton of housing but lack jobs, maybe it should be jobs. In other communities that maybe have wealth and don't want any new jobs, then maybe it should be mixed income housing. I think they're both okay, but I would like to see it go toward balance. In other words, if someone has an excess of something, then I don't know that you can legislate this, but just as a general principle, I think that it's better to try to get some local balance if you can. And that by itself is better for multimodal and sustainable transportation.
Okay, thanks.
Any more for Capital and Finance, or should we move on to the Marketing Operations Communications Standing Committee? All right, I saw Wig nodding. That's excellent. I will slip my notes in here on the screen just so that people can browse them verbatim. As always, I welcome any input from other committee members. I think the notes probably speak for themselves. Actually, I think except for Brian, everybody else. Oh no, Wig wasn't there this month. We talked about issues with the pandemic situation operationally, as noted here. I thought this was particularly significant that New York City had to stop running their typical 24-hour-a-day service probably because of other issues as well, but partly because of homeless people utilizing the service 24 hours a day. We had a discussion about what kinds of issues come up with homeless taking advantage of essentially nonstop rides on MBTA service. I don't believe we came up with any really negative impact to infrastructure other than the possible need for additional cleaning. Of course, if homeless are taking advantage of open spaces on subway and other vehicles, well, I think it's only likely to be subway, yes. That's could be a deterrent to regular ridership. Any comments from anybody else on that? I know we had a deep discussion for quite, I think it was probably what, 45 minutes of the meeting on this topic?
No, it was a really good discussion, and it was a really open and honest discussion, and it went well beyond transportation, but into, you know, really, I think the way we ended up viewing it is if folks are needing to stay on trains, to stay warm, that's really a symptom of a much broader problem in social failing than it is anything else. So I think we were pretty neutral in terms of something to continue to monitor. If you know, right now, because ridership is so low, it's to a certain degree there's space there, and if that's where folks can stay warm, it is what it is. Where I think we said it was something we continue to look at, and as ridership ticks back up, and if it continues to be a challenge, and if all of a sudden, you know, the MBTA is no longer able to provide service for folks because they don't feel comfortable riding transportation, that's something that we may need to be addressed in the future. But it's a complicated topic because it's really a sad issue. But I think we did a good job of covering all angles of it, and kind of a wait and see kind of mode was a result of the discussion.
Sorry to jump in here. Craig, did you, what's going on with your audio? Do you know?
He may not be aware. We didn't tell him verbally. Craig, in the chat, we were mentioning that your audio quality is marginal, and it might be something where you have to disconnect from the meeting and reconnect to make Zoom reestablish. But I mean, we can hear you. It's
painful. It's painful.
Yeah, it's painful. It's a computer glitch thing.
Yes, it's stuttering. You know, it's like.
All right, I'll log into the meeting a different way next time.
No, I wouldn't say different way. I think it's just this particular connection got established in a funky way. You don't have to, but I bet there's a better than 80% chance that if you were to disconnect and reconnect to the meeting, it would be fine. But considering that it's 20:07,
right,
not important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't feel picked on, Craig, and don't feel called out. It was something we were mentioning in chat before, and don't worry about it.
It's not
I
you.
thought it was your old blues voice, actually.
It's not you. It's just you. That's all.
It's a technology thing, not a personal thing. By the way, okay, I got a shout out to Jacob because in this standing committee meeting, he brought up hostile architecture. It's a very interesting read on Wikipedia, by the way. I highly recommend taking a look at that document. I personally had never heard of the term, so I was very glad to have that called out. I mean, it's definitely something that we have seen. Now I'm drawing a blank. Where have we seen it most recently? An MBTA property where, for example, the borders sections are being installed, which prevent people from lying down flat.
Right.
I can't remember what station that was now, but
I believe it was Downtown Crossing, right?
I'll take your word for it. Since I don't remember, I'll go with that.
There was also if anyone's sort of curious as to what hostile architecture is, you know those if you go to the Alewife Garage and you know those spikes on the tops of walls that prevent pigeons from sitting there, it's that, but for people. In its most basic sense.
In other words, it prevents an average-sized human from wanting to relax, but the Jolly Green Giant would just be able to. Never mind.
Yes, and we discussed some in that committee meeting how its impact on people, even who aren't homeless, who just sort of want to exist in spaces.
Exactly. I think I showed enough of the plan for the new Quincy maintenance facility so that people who were there and heard all the details during that subcommittee would run screaming from the room if I talked about it in any depth. But Brian and Wig, as far as capital and finance goes, you might want to keep an eye on that, because if you don't already know, they're taking over a former Lowe's location with the entire parking lot. No, sorry, take that back. A significant amount of the Lowe's parking lot is going to be included within the footprint of the new bus maintenance facility. So it's a huge undertaking. I'm hoping it doesn't have any cost overruns and seems like a very, very good plan. I am very optimistic about it, but as far as, you know, the actual dollar cost benefit, we'll see.
So, Stefan, it's interesting you bring that up, because I saw in passing on the Twitter website that the cost for the Quincy bus facility is around $300 million. So you kind of do the math, and it's north of $2 million a bus. And you know, other bus facilities from other agencies are coming in closer to, say, $500,000 a bus. And I don't know, obviously, as you mentioned, this involves, you know, dismantling a Lowe's. You know, there could be demolition costs in there, but you know, in passing, that anecdote seemed like there might be something up there, right? Like, why is it costing so much? So I don't know. I didn't look into it, but I agree. Like, there's always potential for cost overruns, and kind of interesting. For this
Well,
one, we
they're
definitely
talking
need
about
more bus
a
facilities.
three-story building.
Yep. And I, from what I remember hearing during the public meeting that I attended, there's also plans to be able to accommodate all electric vehicles. So there might be, I mean, this is a little bit of speculation on my part, but there might be a little more electrical infrastructure going into this new Quincy facility than something that was going to be all fossil fuels forever.
You know, generally with construction, the biggest unknown is always the subsurface. But a standardized building, a good estimator can get within 2% in a 1 week estimate. The subsurface, you never know what you're going to find, especially if the new built structure is different enough from what pre-existed that they may not have discovered things.
And I have to admit, immediately adjacent to it is a municipality run park, green space, and what looked like a little bit of a wetland area. So I'm thinking of that now when you're talking about, you know, under surface conditions. There may be some extra mitigation necessary because it's right adjacent to green space, and I don't know if it's wetland exactly, but it's damp land.
Yeah, a good example. I don't know if you guys remember when they were doing the big dig. They hit a giant erratic piece of gabbro diorite, a giant boulder near the Fort Point Channel, and it took them a very long time to bust it up and remove it, and then continue on with the subsurface construction. So you don't always know subsurface. But other than that, the estimators are really good. Unless you have a weird designer, they're really good. So,
well, for everybody who's playing the drinking game of the word gabbro diorite, you got to take a shot. But no, seriously, thank you, Wig. That's excellent. I had no idea about that.
Yeah, occasionally they hit unanticipated bogs too that can result in very big buildings sinking, surprisingly. So that can really slow things down too.
as far as the rest of the notes, I think they speak for themselves. It's a communications issue for us to talk about in the next committee, and like what, I think we have to talk with James J., our still member of the ROC, but sort of leave of absence indefinitely, who's been running the website, to see what we can do to get sort of an ongoing review of MBTA projects and sort of our, I don't know if it's a review exactly, but our weigh in a more public sense. More to come on that. Unless anybody else wants to add anything else, I think we're done with that. Any committee. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
I would just ask if you would please send out the link earlier, because I only get Wi-Fi when I go to a coffee shop. So I usually, Capital was very good because I think the link was sent out the day before, or at least the day before. So if you don't mind just sending it out a little earlier.
Yep, I apologize. I've been what should we say? I've been a little lax with the emails because since we've been doing Zoom since about April, they've been the same meeting IDs, and that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that
because you expect to have the email, and I should deliver on that. So it's on me.
No.
No.
Send it out once. Send it out once more. I will write it in my notebook because I still write with a pen on a piece of paper, if you remember what that was like. And then I'll just put the same link in every week. So you don't have to send it out every day. I didn't realize it was the same link.
I think we should.
I enjoyed the link a little ahead of the meeting because, there's so many things that I've done in between that it's really helpful if it's simple enough.
I aim to do, my goal is 24 hours in advance minimum. And I mean, optimally it would be 48 hours in advance, but yeah, we can do both, Karen.
And if I could just tack on one more thing to Brian's discussion of the density around the stations. I have been struck by how well the CPA, Community Preservation Act, has been working in Somerville. And they do that with, you can have one of three things funded by CPA funds. There's a state match, but they take, the proposals are very creative and they're not always things that you would think of yourself if you were on the committee. So there's a little bit of competition involved. But I've just honestly been stunned at how well that process has worked. They have public presentations of this idea or that idea. In this case, it would be for any additional density required. And there could be a couple general categories as there are for the CPA. And that would give some local control as well, which might make it a better process. Just an odd comment about flexibility.
Cool, thanks. I just noticed we're actually now about 5 minutes behind the printed schedule. Excuse me. Any reports on external meetings or old business, new business to cover before we have a final public comment period? All right. Len, I don't want to put you on the spot, but anything new from RTAC?
Let's see.
It's more of just curiosity more than expecting an update. So
right. Yeah. I mean, so in the last meeting we pretty much had it was kind of like an annual. I don't want to call it tradition. That's not quite the right word, but we had the executive director from RTAC, Tegan Tyke, talk with us, because she used to be the chair of RTAC right before me, and also we had Kate Festock talk with us about shared streets. At the next meeting, we're going to have Marty, You can help me out with this, Bradley Milkovitz.
I think it's Milkovitz, but
Milkovitz.
I'm sad to say that he and I have never worked in the office at the same time because he joined staff after we began working from home.
Right.
So I think that's his name.
Yeah, he's going to talk with us about modeling, and I think give us some insights as how they're going to use modeling to help with scenario planning. I mean, not that they wouldn't anyways, but I think in this cycle of the LRTP, the Long Range Transportation Plan, they are going to bring back scenario planning that was not in the last cycle, but it was in the cycle before that. And there was some desire to have that brought back. And so that's that. I mean, go ahead.
No, I just want to say I'm surprised that modeling would not be part of every cycle. So that I'm very interested.
It's not the modeling. It's not the modeling. It's the scenario planning. The scenario planning. Yeah, the modeling is part of every cycle. But the scenario planning, didn't do the scenario planning in the last cycle, and they're going to do it again in this cycle. At least that's the plan at this point. And I didn't say this in the CIF part of the meeting, but I have extended an invitation to Ryan Hicks to talk with us about parking garages, and the parking ride program. He did a presentation to the congestion management subcommittee for the MPO, and it was a really good presentation that hinted at a lot of data behind it that we could have access to. So I think that fits right into capital investment because it's finance, it provides funds to the T, and of course the parking garages are usually a capital investment. So I'm waiting to hear back from him. Hopefully he can in February. If not, the person who talked at the last MPO meeting about the T's capital projects is willing to talk with us. And it's more about, I'm sorry, not capital projects, asset management. And I think there are some elements of asset management that we as the ROC, if we understand them better, can maybe help advocate for more resources in order to do a more effective job at it. And so it's not that they don't know what to do, it's more that they may not have the resources to do it, but we need to get a better handle on that. So they're going to be happy to talk with us at an upcoming meeting. So that'll either be February if Ryan can't make it, or March. So that's it. Thanks.
Very good. Anyone care to add any final comments before we turn over to public comment period? All right, then Barry, public comments, or anyone else?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment.
Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. Offline, I had a conversation with Karen, and we were discussing the mechanics of means testing. Now, when I use the term mechanics, I'm not talking about what kind of car. That's not exactly. I'm trying to figure out how does one identify people who would be taking advantage of identifying people who should be having low income card of some sort. And this is without having to demean people by asking them for means testing. That doesn't we don't really want the T to get it. I personally do not want the T to get into the mechanics of that, but the Karen asked, are there any other systems that have means testing and have worked that problem out?
Is there anybody from the Capital Finance Committee who feel up to making a quick answer without doing it short shrift? I mean, that may be a conversation for a longer time period. And
Well, Seattle has a program, you know, I and I mean, a few other properties have programs that are linked to income. I mean, and usually it's you aim to give a break to people who are already getting some kind of federal or some kind of assistance based on income. I mean, and so I hear Barry. I mean, it'd be good if the T didn't manage that. I mean, if there was some other way that has already determined that the person needs assistance by other government entities, and we just piggyback on that, you know.
Anyway,
Karen,
that was my question. Without being nosy into people's personal business.
Yeah, well, at some point, I mean, we in order to get assistance, I mean, the government has to, or whatever entity has to determine what your income is, and either you are asked me or they determine that by finding it out some other way, you know. But at some point, that information has to be revealed, you know. And like I said, it'd be good if some other entity did it. I mean, not only to satisfy what you have voiced, Barry, but also it'd be good if the T just didn't have to spend the money, you know, to do that level of management.
hey, Karen, I had to mute you. There was some noise while Barry was talking, but anything you want to add on that?
No, I think I Googled means testing. I couldn't find out anything. It's nice for Len to tell me that it was Seattle and other things. I do think that would be the easy way for the T to do it, is tie it to SNAP or something else. I have a public comment, though, when we're finished with this part.
So
I've said as much as I want.
Okay.
I just have one comment on this topic, which is that, you know, there are people who fall through the net, and I don't think you could rely on the T to identify those people. I certainly would agree with Len on that, but I think that you might have to rely on some social workers on the street, or, you know, they're just people who fall through. And I think if there's an effort, a general effort made to identify them. For example, earlier I was in one of our conversations a few minutes ago, I was reminding myself that Cambridge had been very concerned about providing showers and bathrooms for homeless people during COVID. That was a critical issue to try to prevent some of the spread, rampant spread of disease in the population that they were concerned about. So I think that for the people who fall through, you would need to identify some of the people who are experts. I know there's some doctors who just go out on the street and treat people who have completely fallen through the cracks. But I agree, it's not something the T can do.
Yeah. Karen, go ahead.
Oh, this is the public comment? Is that
Yep.
comment ready? Are you ready? Okay, so I have an old folks Charlie card, and it stopped working. So I went to the Charlie card store at Downtown Crossing, and I didn't see the regular Charlie card store, but there's a special one for old people, and I was treated wonderfully. I think they took my temperature before I got in or something, and the people at the counter were just, I can't speak highly enough how professional, how they treated me, and how I got my my new Charlie card in the mail, and I still had money on my Charlie card. Somehow they went in the back room and figured out how much I had and gave me a Charlie ticket to last me until I got my Charlie card. Anyway, I could not speak up, but this is just for old people. So you young whippersnappers, God knows what you're treated like down there. Anyway, that's enough.
That's fabulous. Thank you, Karen. It makes me wonder if at a future operations subcommittee, we should find out more about what went into making that experience so good and try to have
Replicate.
other parts of have it replicated around the agency. If it's that great, then it should be used as the gold standard.
I've had the
Yes.
same experience years, a few years back at the trolley car store. Same kind of issue, same experience. I was really impressed.
Yeah, no, but this was only for the old people. I do not know. I didn't even see where the real Charlie Card store was open. I walked by a lot of closed windows, and then I got to the to my where I was to go, and so I have no idea what and I was in a hurry. If I'd been more relaxed and not in a hurry, I would have looked around and asked where the young whippersnappers go, and I didn't have time, or I thought I didn't have time to do that.
Yeah, and I was at the regular one, this experience years ago, but they treated me the same way. I got the ticket, they were able to transfer the balance. It was really, and it was efficient too. It was impressive.
Well, Karen, I can't thank you enough for having us wrap up the meeting on such a high note. It's really great to hear such positive feedback. I just have to comment though, maybe there's only one Charlie Card store for everybody, and you're actually a young whippersnapper yourself.
I haven't been a young whippersnapper since Jack Benny was 39.
All right, in spite of what I might say. Okay. Anyone, any final comments before we bring the meeting to a close for this month?
I make a motion to end the meeting. It's been a wonderful time.
I'll second that. Thank you, everyone. See you next month for subcommittees and here again. Stay well and see you next time.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night.